Before we begin, do me one small favor and tell us in the comments which city you are watching from tonight, and then stay with me all the way to the end, because you are going to want to rate this story from 0 to 10 when it is over. Now, let us begin. The first snow of the year came down on Boston that night, and it came down on everyone the same, on the glass towers downtown and on the cracked strip of sidewalk outside a little diner called the Copper Kettle. Inside, the windows had fogged to a soft gold. Outside, the world had turned white and silent and mean. That was the city in one glance, warmth on one side of the glass, cold on the other, a thin pane deciding who got which. Cora Bishop wiped the same patch of counter she had already wiped twice, because moving kept her warm and kept her from thinking too hard. She was 26 years old and her feet ached like they belonged to a woman twice that age. She had worked a double yesterday. She was halfway through another one now. The tips lived in a coffee can under the register, and she had already counted them twice, and counting them a third time would not make the number grow. The Copper Kettle was the kind of place the city forgot on purpose. Vinyl booths patched with tape that almost matched. A pie case that hummed. A neon sign in the window that had lost its second letter years ago, so that it promised, to anyone driving past, a warm plate of open. Rosa ran the kitchen the way a grandmother runs a holiday, with noise and love and a wooden spoon she was not afraid to wave. And Cora, who had wanted to be a chef since she was 9 years old, waited tables here and told herself it counted as being close to the dream. It did not, and she knew it did not, but a person had to tell herself something. "You are limping," Rosa called through the pass, not looking up from the grill. "Sit for 5 minutes before I put you on the special board as tonight's soup." "I am fine," Cora said. "You are stubborn." Different word, same girl. Rosa slid a plate across the steel. On it sat a grilled cheese browned to the exact shade of a good autumn, and a small cup of tomato soup that steamed like a promise. "Your break. Eat it hot for once in your life." Cora looked at the plate the way a tired person looks at a small kindness, like it might be a trick. It was the only food she would have until morning. She had $4 in her pocket and 11 days until payday, and the arithmetic of her life did not leave room for a second meal. This grilled cheese was not a snack. It was dinner, and breakfast, and the reason she would make it through the closing shift without her hands shaking. "Thank you, Rosa," she said, and she meant it more than the two small words could hold. She carried the plate toward the back, to the narrow rear door that led out onto the alley. It was the only place a person could get a minute alone. She pushed it open with her hip, and the cold reached in and grabbed her by the collar, and she almost turned right back around. Almost. Because there, against the brick, half sheltered under the dead awning of the shuttered laundromat next door, sat a man. He was folded into himself the way people fold when the cold has been working on them for hours. A dark coat, worn to the color of wet newspaper. A beard going gray at the edges, though the face beneath it did not look old, only weathered, only tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. His hands were bare and red. There was snow in the creases of his sleeves, which meant he had been sitting long enough to be snowed on and had not bothered to brush it away, which meant he had stopped expecting the weather to change for him. He was not asking for anything. That was what undid her. He was not holding out a cup or a sign. He was just sitting, quietly, in the cold, the way something forgotten sits, and the steam from her grilled cheese rose up between them like a small white flag. Cora stood in the doorway with her only meal in her hands and did the math once more. $4. 11 days. 1 plate. One stranger who had not asked her for a thing. "Hey," she said softly, and her breath ghosted in the air. "You hungry?" The man lifted his head. His eyes, when they found her, were startling, a clear and careful gray, sharper than the rest of him, the one part the cold had not managed to dull. He looked at the plate, and then he looked at her face, and something in his expression flickered, as if he had asked a question a long time ago and had just now, unexpectedly, gotten an answer. "You do not want to do that," he said. His voice was rougher than she expected, but underneath the roughness there was something else, some old shape of a way of speaking that did not belong to the alley. "That is your plate. I have been sitting here 2 hours. Nobody gives away their own plate." "Well," Cora said, and she stepped out into the snow, and she let the door fall shut behind her, sealing the warmth away on the other side of the glass. "Guess you never met anybody dumb enough." She crossed the alley, and she crouched down in front of him on the cold ground, and she held out everything she had. For a moment the man did not take the plate. He looked at it the way you look at a thing you are not sure you are allowed to have, and Cora understood that look, because she had worn it her whole life. "Take it before the soup gives up," she said. "Cold tomato soup is a crime against Rosa. She will feel it from inside and she will know." That got the smallest sound out of him, not quite a laugh, more the memory of one. He took the plate. His red hands closed around the warm ceramic, and she watched some knot the cold had tied come loose in his shoulders. He ate the way careful people eat when they are very hungry and do not want to show it, in even bites, slow on purpose. She had eaten like that too, on the bad nights. "Sit," he said, nodding at the crate beside him. "You are letting the heat out of yourself standing there." She should have gone back inside. Her break was 6 minutes and 3 of them were gone. But there was something about the alley, about a stranger telling her to mind her own warmth, that made her sit down on the overturned milk crate and pull her thin jacket tighter. "What is your name?" she asked. He chewed, swallowed, considered her over the rim of the soup cup. "Danny," he said, and there was the smallest hitch before it, the size of a breath. "Just Danny. What is yours, since you are handing out dinners to strangers?" "Cora." She tucked her hands into her sleeves. "Cora Bishop. I work in there." "The Copper Kettle." "The Copper Kettle," Danny repeated, slow, tasting the words. "Good name for a place. Honest. You would not believe how many restaurants pick names that lie about them." He tore the grilled cheese and offered her half without ceremony, as if the plate had been theirs together all along. "That is yours," she said. "And now half of it is yours. That is how it works when somebody sits with you." He held it there until she took it, because refusing felt crueler than accepting, and because she was so hungry the smell of it made her dizzy. They ate together in the snow, a waitress and a man the city had decided not to see, and it was the first meal in a long time that had not felt like fuel. It had felt like company. "So why are you sitting in an alley in the first snow of the year, Danny?" she asked, "instead of somewhere with a roof?" He was quiet a moment. "Shelters fill up early on the cold nights. And I wanted to see something." He said it plainly, and then he seemed to decide he had said too much, and he changed the shape of it. "I wanted to see if the city was still the city. You spend enough time up high, you forget what the ground feels like." He talked, when he talked, like a man reading from a better book than the one he was living in. His grammar was too clean. His hands, red as they were not the hands of a man who had spent years outside. The nails were trimmed. There was a pale band on his wrist where a watch had recently been, the skin lighter than the rest. She noticed all of it, the way tired, observant people notice things, and she said none of it, because it was not her business, and because whoever he was cold, and cold does not care about your last name. "Can I ask you something?" Danny said, "and you tell me the truth?" "Depends how nosy." "That plate. You said it is your only food tonight. Is that true?" Cora looked at the half-grilled cheese in her hand and thought about lying, then thought about how the snow made everything quiet enough that a lie would echo. "Yeah," she said. "It is. $4 to my name and 11 days to payday. But I get to eat tomorrow. I have got a shift and Rosa always feeds me. And you were sitting out here not asking anybody for anything." She shrugged. "I can be hungry for one night. I have been hungry before. You looked like maybe you had forgotten anybody would ever hand you something without wanting it back." Danny did not answer right away. When she glanced up, His grey eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that had nothing beaten down about it at all, an expression so alert, so quietly stunned, that for one strange second she felt like the one being studied, like the specimen under the glass. "No," he said finally, very softly. "No, I had not forgotten. I just had not seen it in a long time." The back door banged open. "Cora." Tanya's voice, sharp with cold. "Table 9 is waving the menu like a flag. Break is over, girl." Cora stood, brushing snow from her jeans. She hesitated, then unwound a thin scarf from her own neck and pressed it into Danny's red hands. "It is not much," she said. "But it is warmer on you than on me right now." He took it. He looked at it like it was made of gold. "Cora Bishop," he said, as if he were writing the name down somewhere permanent. "I am going to remember this." "Sure you will." She smiled, tired and kind. "Stay warm, Danny." She went back into the light and the noise and the endless tables, and she did not see the man in the alley pull a phone from his coat, a phone far too new for a man with no roof, and lift it to his ear, and say in a voice suddenly stripped of all its roughness, "Cancel the rest of the list. I found what I was looking for. If you are still with me, this is the part where it stops being a cold night and starts being a story, so go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you have not yet, and then let us keep going, because Cora Bishop has no idea what she just did." The rest of Cora's shift passed the way all her shifts passed, in a blur of refilled coffee and split checks and the particular ache that lives in the arches of a person on her feet for the good of other people's evenings. At the end of it she stepped out back to drag the trash and found the alley empty, the milk crate dusted white, no sign he had ever been there except a clean patch on the ground where a body had kept the snow away. She told herself she was glad. Maybe he had found a shelter bed. Maybe her scarf was keeping his neck warm somewhere with a roof. She did not let herself think the other thing, the thing a person who has lost people learns not to think, which is that the world is very good at swallowing the ones nobody is looking for. Home was a third-floor walk-up she shared with a radiator that worked when it felt like it and a downstairs neighbor who played the same 3 sad songs every night. She hung her wet coat on the door and sat on the edge of a mattress that had come with the apartment. On the milk crate nightstand stood the only photograph she had framed, her mother, Diane, laughing in a kitchen that no longer existed, a wooden spoon in one hand and flour on her cheek. Her mother had taught her everything Cora knew about food, which was to say everything Cora knew about love, because in the Bishop house they had been the same thing. You fed people. That was how you told them they mattered when you did not have the words or the money. Diane Bishop had raised her daughter to believe that a full plate given freely was a kind of prayer. Then Diane got sick, the slow expensive kind, and Cora had left culinary school in her second semester to take care of her. 18 months of watching the woman who taught her to cook forget how to hold a fork. And at the end of it, grief, and a stack of medical bills tall enough to have its own weather. $41,000, the last time Cora had been brave enough to add it up. A debt with her dead mother's illness attached to it, arriving in windowed envelopes every month, patient as a tide. That was the arithmetic under the $4. That was why the grilled cheese had been dinner. People looked at a girl in a diner apron and thought they knew the whole of her. They did not know she could butcher a duck and make a consommé clear as glass, that she fell asleep reading cookbooks like other people read novels, dreaming of a place of her own, small, warm, honest, with her own name over the door. The next morning, she came in early to find the whole diner buzzing wrong. Rosa was not at the grill. Rosa was standing by the register with her arms folded and her mouth set in a line Cora had only seen at funerals. Tanya was on her phone, thumbs flying. And taped to the front door, official and cold and printed on paper too nice for the copper kettle, was a notice. Vance Hospitality Group, it read across the top, in letters that cost money. And below that, a lot of careful language that all meant the same simple thing. The copper kettle had been acquired. The neighborhood had heard the rumor for weeks and prayed it was only a rumor. It was not. Some empire of glass restaurants where the smallest plate cost more than Cora made in a shift now owned the vinyl booths, the humming pie case, and the neon sign that promised open. They bought us, Rosa said, and her voice, which Cora had heard shout down a full Saturday rush without cracking, cracked now. 40 years my brother-in-law ran this place, and some man in a suit bought it like a used car. What does it mean? Cora asked, though the cold in her stomach already knew. It means a review. Tanya looked up from her phone, her pretty face pinched. I looked them up. Vance Group. They buy little places, quote-unquote underperformers, and they either turn them into something shiny with $40 toast, or they close them and sell the building. They have got some efficiency guy who comes in with a spreadsheet and decides who lives. Julian Vance, Rosa said, and she said the name like a swear. That is the one whose face is on the money. Youngest billionaire in the city, they say. Built an empire out of buying the soul out of places like this. She looked around at her kitchen, at 40 years of grease and love baked into the walls. Places like ours. Cora stared at the notice, at the expensive letters, at the name Vance, and felt the fragile arithmetic of her life tilt one more degree toward the edge. If they closed the copper kettle, she lost the job, and the job was the only thing standing between her and the envelopes. When, she managed. When do we find out? That is the thing, Tanya said. The owner is coming himself. Today. Some kind of walkthrough. They said keep it normal, act like a regular day. She laughed, a little wild. Act normal. The man who decides if we all keep eating is going to sit in one of my sections, and I am supposed to act normal. The bell over the door jingled. And every head in the copper kettle turned at once. He came in from the cold in a coat that cost more than the diner's monthly rent, charcoal wool, snow melting on the shoulders. 2 people flanked him, a severe woman with a tablet and a silver-haired man in a suit the exact gray of a closing door. But Cora did not look at the handlers. She looked at the man in the middle, at the clean jaw where a rough gray beard had been, at the platinum watch on a wrist that last night had worn a pale band. At the gray eyes. The clear, careful gray eyes, the one part of him the cold had not been able to dull. The floor went out from under her. Danny, she said. It came out of her before she could stop it, small and stunned, into the sudden quiet of the room. His eyes found her across the diner, and she watched the polished man falter, and in that half-second she had her answer, complete and terrible. There had been no homeless man, no Danny. There had been a costume, a beard, a phone too new for the alley, a rich man playing a part, and she had crouched in the snow and given him the only food she had and called it company. You know Mr. Vance? Tanya breathed. Julian Vance. The name on the money. The man with the spreadsheet who decided who lived. Everyone, a moment. Julian's voice filled the room, smooth now, unroughened, a boardroom voice, and it made the memory of the alley voice feel like a wound. My name is Julian Vance. My company has acquired this location. I know what my company's reputation is. His eyes kept cutting back to Cora, and she kept looking at the floor, because if she looked at him she was going to either cry or throw a coffee pot. I did not come to read you a statement. Before I decide the future of a place, I like to see the truth of it. So I spent last night the way I spend one night at every location we consider. On the sidewalk outside. As no one. A murmur went through the staff. Rosa's arms uncrossed slowly. I want to know how a place treats a person who can do nothing for it, Julian said. Because that tells me what it is actually made of. Most places, I sit in the cold for hours and become furniture. People step over me. Managers shoo me off. He paused, and now he turned and looked at Cora full on, and the whole room turned with him. Last night, one person in this city gave me the only meal she had. $4 to her name and 11 days to payday, and she handed me her entire dinner in the snow and sat down on a milk crate so I would not eat alone. And then she gave me her scarf. He drew it from his coat pocket. Her scarf. Thin, gray, unraveling at one end. He held it up like it was a banner. I have eaten in the finest rooms in the world, Julian Vance said, and I have never in my life been handed anything that cost the giver more. Cora's face was on fire. Every eye in the diner was on her, and the eyes were not all kind. Tanya's had gone flat and calculating. Even Rosa was looking at her strangely, this girl who had spent last night with the owner and never said a word. Please do not, Cora said, low. Do not do that. Do not make me a story. It is not a story. It is the reason this diner is not on the closure list this morning, Julian said. It is the reason none of you are. Relief broke across the room like a wave, someone actually gasped. Rosa pressed a hand to her mouth. But Cora felt no relief. She felt sick, because she could already see the shape of what he had done landing on her co-workers' faces. He had just told an entire staff that their jobs had been saved by her. And people do not love the person they have been told to thank. People resent a debt they did not agree to owe. Can I speak with you, Cora said. Privately. Julian. Privately, she said again, and turned and walked to the back before her legs could betray how badly they were shaking, out the rear door into the alley where it had all started, where the milk crate still sat under its skin of snow. He followed. She heard the door, then his good shoes in the slush, then his voice, and the roughness was back in it now, something real fighting its way up through the polish. Cora. Was any of it true? She rounded on him. The snow had started again, fine and slow. Last night. Was one single thing you said to me true, or was I just the part of the test that made you feel good about yourself? My name, he said. My name was not true. Almost everything else was. Your name. She laughed, and it hurt. Danny. You looked me in the eye and made up a name so I would trust you enough to feel sorry for you. So you would treat me like a man instead of a wallet, he said. Do you know how long it has been since someone did not know what I was worth before they knew my name? You gave me half the only thing you had and you argued with me about tomato soup and wanted nothing from me, because you thought I had nothing to give. You are the only person in a decade who has treated me like that. That is not my problem, Cora said, and her voice broke straight down the middle. You got a lonely rich man's fairy tale. I gave away my dinner. The snow fell between them. Out on the street a plow scraped by, the ordinary city going on, indifferent to the fact that Cora's whole understanding of the last 12 hours had just been turned inside out in an alley. You are right, Julian said. He did not defend himself, which she had not expected. The men she had known always defended themselves, always had a reason the hurt they caused was your fault. Julian just stood in the snow in his beautiful coat and let it land. You gave away your dinner and I gave away nothing, because I had nothing to lose by sitting in that alley. I could stand up and get in a warm car any time I wanted. You could not. I am not going to pretend it was fair. Then why, she said. Why the beard, why the lie, why any of it? Because the numbers lie to me. He pushed a hand through his snow-wet hair, and for a second he looked like a tired man instead of a fortune. I run 400 restaurants. I have never met most of the people who work in them. They are rows on a screen. Labor cost, a red number or a black number. A few years ago I realized I had started to believe the screen. I had started closing places because a cell was red and telling myself that was just business. And I could not remember the last time I had thought about the people inside the cell. He looked at her. So now, before I decide, I go sit outside as nothing. Because you cannot see the soul of a place from a spreadsheet. But you can see it from the gutter in front of it. It is the only honest thing I do. Cora wrapped her arms around herself. She did not want to understand him. It was easier when he was just the name on the money. And I passed your test, she said bitterly. Lucky me. You did not pass a test. You wrecked it. Something raw came into his voice. You were not supposed to be the deciding vote for a place I had already half decided to close. This location loses money, Cora. The Copper Kettle is a red cell in a bad neighborhood, and Grant has a very good slideshow about selling the building. I came here ready to be talked into the math. He shook his head, like he could not account for it. And then a waitress gave a homeless man her only meal and would not take no for an answer, and I could not make the math matter anymore. So you kept it open to feel like a good person. I kept it open because a place that grows a person like you is worth more than its worst quarter. He said it flatly, like a fact he had checked twice. That is not charity. That is the best investment reasoning I have used all year. The back door opened a careful inch. Tanya's face appeared in the gap then withdrew, but Cora had seen the sharp new interest there, the recalculation. By tonight it would be all over the neighborhood. The waitress and the billionaire. She could feel the story being written around her, and she was not the one holding the pen. You have made my life impossible, she said quietly. In there, they are never going to look at me the same. Half of them think I knew who you were, that I played you for it. And the other half think they owe me their jobs, which is worse, because now every one of them has to be grateful to a coworker who scrapes their plates. She met his eyes. You did not save me anything. You put a target on my back and called it a gift. Julian was silent a long moment. The snow gathered on his shoulders, the same snow that had gathered there when she thought he was a man the city had forgotten, and she hated that the sight of it still moved something in her. Then let me fix it, he said. You cannot fix it. That is what I am telling you. I can tell them the truth. That the test was already passed at 3 other locations. That this diner was coming off the closure list regardless. That your kindness confirmed the decision, it did not cause it. He took a step closer, careful, the way you approach something that might bolt. I can take the debt off your shoulders, Cora. Not the job. The story. I am good at controlling a story. It is most of what I do. And what do you get? She searched his face. Men like you do not do favors. What is the price? Julian Vance looked at her, snow in his lashes, gray eyes steady, and said the most dangerous thing he could have said, because it was true, and she could hear that it was true. I would like, he said, to be allowed to know you. Not as a test. Not as a story. As Danny, if that is the only version of me you do not hate yet. I would like to come back to this diner as a customer and sit in your section and order the worst coffee in Boston and be, for 1 hour, a man you are not afraid of and owe nothing to. He almost smiled. That is the whole price. You can say no. People never say no to me, and I am starting to think it has rotted me. So please. Feel free. And Cora, standing in the snow with her heart pounding and her mother's voice in her head saying you feed people, that is how you tell them they matter, heard herself say the thing that would change everything. 1 coffee, she said. And you tip like a human being. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Not as Julian Vance, owner and verdict. As a man in a plain sweater who sat in the corner booth, Cora's section, and ordered the coffee that Rosa brewed strong enough to strip paint, and drank it like it was the finest thing in the world. He left cash tips folded under the saucer, generous but not insane, just enough to make Tanya raise an eyebrow and Rosa purse her lips. The staff watched him the way you watch weather. But Julian had done what he promised. He had gathered them the morning after and told them the plain truth, that the closure decision had been made above Cora's head and unmade above it too, that no one owed anyone their job. He had said it in a way that took the target off her back and put it, quietly, on his own, and Cora had watched him do it and understood that this, too, was a kind of skill, and had not known whether to be grateful or wary. She settled on both. Grateful and wary were, she was learning, a reasonable way to feel about Julian Vance. Tell me something real, she said one slow afternoon, sliding into the booth across from him because the diner was empty and her feet hurt. You know things about me you had no right to know. $4. 11 days. You know my whole sad arithmetic. I know a beard and a fake name. So. Something real. Julian turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn. My father built the company, he said. Arthur Vance. He started with one steakhouse and he died owning half the dining rooms in New England, and the thing he was proudest of, the thing he actually said to me from a hospital bed, was that he had never once let sentiment cost him $1. Never let sentiment cost you $1. He looked up. I was raised by that sentence. I am very, very good at that sentence. And I have started to suspect it is the reason I ever sat in that alley, hoping a stranger would prove me wrong about people. And I did. And you did. He said it simply. You cost yourself a dinner for a man who could give you nothing. You let sentiment cost you everything you had. My father would have called you a fool. A muscle moved in his jaw. My father was a very rich man who died being handed water by nurses whose names he never learned. I do not want to be handed water by strangers, Cora. I am 34 years old and I have 3 houses and I could not tell you the name of one person who would sit in the snow with me for free. The honesty of it landed in the quiet diner like something dropped. Cora looked at this man the whole city envied and saw, for the first time clearly, the shape of what he did not have. She had lost her mother and drowned in debt and still knew that Rosa would sit in any snow for her. She had that. He did not. It was the strangest arithmetic yet, and it tilted something in her that had been rigid since the alley. That is the loneliest thing I ever heard, she said softly. Do not feel sorry for me. You will spoil me, and I told you, it has already rotted me. But he almost smiled when he said it, and she almost smiled back, and for a second the booth was warm in a way the radiator at home had never managed. She had forgotten warmth could feel like this. They talked. That became the thing they did. Between tables, in the dead hours, over paintstripper coffee, they talked the way she had once talked to a man in an alley, easily, honestly, 2 people who had each expected the other to want something and had been, so far, wrong. He told her about the empire, the boredom of it, the way winning had stopped feeling like anything. She told him about her mother, about culinary school, about the small warm honest place she still dreamed of at 2 in the morning. She told him things she had not told anyone, and watched him hold them carefully, and kept waiting for a catch that did not come. You cook, he said one evening, not a question. Rosa told me. She said you are better than she is and she has been doing it 40 years and it makes her furious. Cora flushed. Rosa exaggerates. Rosa threatened me with a spoon for owning the building. Rosa does not flatter. He leaned forward. Cook for me. Not here. One night, off the clock. I want to eat something you made because you wanted to, not because a customer ordered it. I will buy whatever you need. Anything in the world. And there it was. The catch. Not a cruel one, but the shape of the thing she had known was coming. The money. The gap. The place where his world reached into hers and picked things up like they weighed nothing. No, she said. No. I will cook for you. She lifted her chin. In my kitchen. With my $4. You want something real from me, Julian, you get it on my terms, not bought with your card. That is the deal. You already tested me once. You do not get to buy me the second time. Something moved across his face that she would think about for a long time, not amusement and not offense, something more like a man watching a locked door he had assumed was a wall. On your terms, he agreed quietly. God, you are the only person alive who tells me no. He shook his head. I think I would give the whole company to keep hearing it. She cooked for him on a Sunday, in her 3rd-floor walk-up, on a stove with one burner that ran too hot and one that barely ran at all. She made her mother's chicken, the braised one, the recipe that lived in her hands and not on any card, and she made it out of the cheapest bird the market had and a fistful of herbs and 40 minutes of patience, and she made it perfectly, because there was one thing in Cora Bishop's whole precarious life that she had never once doubted, and it was this. Julian Vance, who had eaten in the finest rooms in the world, sat at her wobbling second-hand table under the flickering light and took one bite and went completely silent, and then set down his fork and pressed the back of his hand to his mouth, and when he looked up his grey eyes were wet. "That is the best thing I have ever eaten," he said, and his voice was the alley voice, the real one. "I am not exaggerating for you. I run 400 restaurants and this cheap chicken in this cold kitchen is the best thing I have ever put in my mouth, and I think it is because you meant it." "My mother meant it," Cora said. "I just remember how. They ate the whole meal at that wobbling table, and afterward they did the dishes together in the tiny sink, his sleeves rolled up, a billionaire drying mismatched plates with a dish towel gone thin at the middle, and it was so absurd and so ordinary and so good that Cora had to keep turning to the sink so he would not see her face. He kissed her by the door. It was not the kiss of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. It was careful, and it asked, and when she kissed him back she felt the whole cold arithmetic of her life go quiet for the length of it, for $41,011 days all hushing at once, and there was only the warm kitchen and the man who had turned out to be someone she could not stop wanting to feed. For 2 weeks, she let herself have it. Then the photograph ran. It was a grainy thing, shot through the diner window from across the street, Cora leaning into the corner booth, Julian's hand over hers on the table. And the headline attached to it, in the kind of gossip column that got shared 10,000 times before lunch, read, "Billionaire Vance's Cinderella," or his next acquisition. The story underneath was worse. An unnamed source, close to the situation, said the waitress had known exactly who he was the night of the so-called test. That the meal in the snow had been bait. That Cora Bishop was a clever girl who had played the loneliest rich man in Boston like a fiddle and won a whole diner full of jobs and a place in his bed for the price of a grilled cheese. By noon the story had 100,000 shares. Strangers who had never set foot in Boston suddenly had opinions about her face, her apron, her motives, and every single one of them had already decided she was guilty of something. Cora knew who the source was before she finished reading. She had seen Tanya on her phone in the alley that first night. She had felt the recalculation happening behind her coworker's pretty, pinched face for weeks. But knowing who did it did not fix what it did. Because the worst thing about a lie is when it borrows the bones of a truth. Cora had noticed his trimmed nails. Cora had seen the pale band where the watch had been. Cora had known, in the wordless way you know things, that the man was not what he seemed. She had given him the meal anyway, given it because he was cold and had asked for nothing, but she could not stand in front of the whole world and swear she had thought he was nobody, because some quiet part of her had suspected he was somebody, and the story took that suspicion and made it into a plan. "Tell me you did not know," Grant Kessler said. He had come himself, the silver-haired man from the walk-through, the efficiency man, Julian's second. He sat in the corner booth where Julian used to sit and he did not order coffee. He slid a check across the table, and the number on it had a great many zeros, and Cora looked at it and felt her stomach drop straight through the floor. "What is this?" "A separation agreement." Kessler folded his hands. "Miss Bishop, I am going to speak plainly, because Julian will not. That man is worth what he is worth because people trust the Vance name. A story like this, The Billionaire and the Scheming Waitress, it costs the company real money, today, in ways I could show you on a chart. My job is to protect the asset. The asset is his name." He nudged the check an inch closer. "This is very generous. It pays off a certain medical debt I took the liberty of looking into, and a great deal more. In exchange you resign, you relocate, and you stop being a headline. Everyone goes back to their lives. He will thank me for it later. They always do." Cora stared at the check. $41,000 of her mother's dying, erased with a signature. And more on top, enough to open the small warm honest place, enough to stop being afraid of envelopes for the rest of her life. Everything she wanted, sitting on the wobbling vinyl of the booth where he used to drink bad coffee and tell her the truth. All she had to do was agree that she was exactly what the headline said. "Get out," Cora said. Kessler blinked. Miss Bishop, I do not think you understand the size of what I am. I understand it fine. It is the size of a person's whole life. She pushed the check back across the table with one finger, slow, so he would not mistake it for hesitation. You looked into my mother's medical debt. You put my mother's death on a chart. And now you are sitting in his booth offering to buy my silence and calling it generous. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. Take your check, Mr. Kessler, and get out of my section. He got out. Men like Kessler always know the exact moment the math turns against them. But it did not fix anything, and Cora was not naive enough to think it did. Refusing the money did not unmake the headline, and the headline had already done its work. The regulars who used to chat now watched her sideways. A man she had served eggs to for a year asked, not unkindly, if it was true, if she had known, and she opened her mouth to say no and found that the honest answer, I suspected but gave anyway, was too complicated to fit between the counter and the door. Silence looked like guilt, and she learned that fast. And Julian did not come. 3 days. 4. His booth sat empty and Cora told herself it was better this way, told herself the way you tell yourself a wound is fine while you are still bleeding into your sleeve. She had known from the alley that his world reached into hers and picked things up like they weighed nothing. She had let herself forget it for 2 warm weeks. Now the forgetting was over, and the arithmetic was back, colder than ever, because now she knew exactly what she was losing. She had survived loss before. She would again. On the 5th day, she got a different summons. The car was black and long and waited at the curb like a held breath, and the driver held a small cream envelope with her name on it. Inside, one line. I would be grateful for an hour of your time. It was not signed by Julian. It was signed, in a strong old-fashioned hand, Eleanor Vance. His mother. The house was in a kind of neighborhood where the trees were older than the country, and Eleanor Vance received her in a room that had more books than Cora had ever seen outside a library. She was a straight-backed woman in her 60s with her son's exact gray eyes and none of his uncertainty, and she looked at Cora the way an appraiser looks at a stone, for the flaw, patiently, expecting to find it. You refused Grant's check, Eleanor said, without preamble. That was either very principled or very strategic. A clever girl might refuse a small fortune knowing it would make her look principled and lead to a larger one. Which is it? So this was to be another test. Cora was so tired of being tested. But she sat up straight, because her mother had raised her to sit up straight in front of women who thought money was the same as being right. I did not refuse it to look like anything, Cora said. I refused it because he put my mother's death on a spreadsheet and asked me to sign it. You want to know if I am after your son's money. I am not going to convince you by arguing. So think whatever costs you the least, Mrs. Vance. But do not sit there and pretend that a woman who married into this family does not know exactly what it is like to be looked at the way you are looking at me right now. Something flickered in Eleanor's face. The appraiser's patience wavered. I was a schoolteacher, Eleanor said, after a silence. When Arthur met me. I taught the 4th grade, and I married a man with one steakhouse and a great deal of ambition, and I spent 40 years learning to be a Vance. It is a full-time occupation. It cost me a self I have not seen since the Ford administration. She turned a ring on her finger, a habit, an old tell. Arthur used to say he never let sentiment cost him $1. He said it like a virtue. He died proud of it. And every nurse in that hospital was a stranger to him, because he had never once in his life given anything away that he did not expect to profit from. Her gray eyes came up, and they were not an appraiser's eyes anymore. And then my son comes home and tells me a waitress gave him her only dinner in the snow, and would not take his money, and told him no, and cooked him a chicken in a cold apartment that made him cry. Do you know what that is, Miss Bishop, to a family that has forgotten how to be given anything for free? I do not know, Cora said honestly. It is a miracle, Eleanor said. It is the thing I stopped believing existed. And my son is upstairs in his father's old study convinced he has ruined it, convinced that being who he is will always cost the people he loves everything, exactly the way it cost me. She stood, suddenly, decisively, a woman who had made up her mind. He did not stay away to hurt you. He stayed away because Grant convinced him that leaving was the only gift he had left to give you. That the kindest thing a Vance can do for a good person is get out of her life before the name grinds her down. She looked at Cora. I have spent 40 years watching this family confuse withdrawal with love. I would very much like to watch someone break the habit. Would you? Cora found him where his mother said he would be, in a study that smelled of old paper and colder things, standing at a tall window with his back to the door and the whole lit-up city spread out beneath him like something he owned, which, in fact, much of it was. He did not turn around. Grant told me you refused the money, he said. I told him you would. He did not believe me. He thinks everyone has a number. A long breath. I am so sorry, Cora. The photograph, the story, all of it. I brought that into your life. Every reasonable projection says the longer you stand next to me, the more it costs you. Your reputation. Your peace. The plain quiet ordinary life you actually want. I ran the numbers, God help me, I ran the numbers on a person again, and every version ends with you paying for who I am. Now he turned, and he looked wrecked, the polish all gone, just the man from the alley in a rich man's study. So I did the one generous thing I know how to do. I stepped back. I let you go. My father would have called it good business. Your father, Cora said, died being handed water by strangers. You told me that yourself. She crossed the room slowly. You keep doing the thing you hate. You keep confusing leaving with kindness. You sat in an alley because you were afraid you had become a man who only sees the numbers, and then the second something real got hard, you closed me like a red cell on a screen. You did not step back to protect me, Julian. You stepped back to protect yourself from watching it get hard. He flinched like she had struck him, because it was true, and he was, whatever else he was, a man who could still recognize a true number. For a moment neither of them spoke. Beyond the glass the city glittered on, 10,000 lit windows, and behind every one of them, she thought, somebody was deciding whether to be brave or safe. She had spent her whole life choosing safe. She was finished with it. Let me tell you what I actually want, Cora said, since everyone in your family keeps deciding it for me. I do not want your check. I do not want Grant's separation agreement. I do not want a foundation grant or a corporate position invented to keep me near you, because the second I let you fix my life with your money, I stop being the woman who gave you a grilled cheese and start being one more thing you bought, and then you will look at me across a table in 10 years and wonder if I was ever real, the same way you wonder about everyone else. She stopped in front of him. I want you to stop testing people and start trusting one. I want you to stand next to me in the ugly story and not run the numbers. That is it. That is the whole price. And it is so much higher than the check, and I think you know it, and I think it is the only thing you have ever actually been afraid to spend. Julian Vance looked at the woman in the thrift store coat standing in his father's study, and he did something no Vance had done in that house in 40 years. He chose sentiment. Out loud. On purpose. There is a board meeting Thursday, he said, and his voice shook, and he let it shake. Grant has the votes to fold the underperforming locations. The copper kettle is at the top of the list, it always has been, it loses money every quarter and it always will, and there is no honest number that saves it. He took her hands, both of them, the way she had once handed him half a grilled cheese, giving with both hands so there could be no doubt. So I am not going to save it with a number. I am going to walk into that room and tell them we are keeping the copper kettle open, not as a diner, as the First Bishop Kitchen, a working restaurant that trains cooks who could never afford culinary school, run by a chef who left school to take care of her mother and never got to go back. Rosa will run the line until you are ready to take it, and you will be, because you are the best cook I have ever met and the only one who ever fed me for nothing. I am going to put your name over the door, not because I bought it for you, but because you are going to earn it in front of every skeptic in that company, and I am going to spend the one thing I have never spent on anybody. I am going to spend my father's approval. I am going to stand up in the room he built and let sentiment cost me a great many dollars, in public, and call it the best decision I have ever made. He almost smiled. You said you would not be bought. Good. I am not offering to buy you. I am offering to be, for the rest of my life, the man who was dumb enough to give away his whole plate. You taught me how. Turns out I just needed to watch somebody do it once. Cora Bishop, who had $4.41,000 and a dead mother's recipe in her hands, looked at the loneliest rich man in Boston offering not to rescue her but to stand beside her in the cold, and felt the last rigid thing in her chest come loose. You are going to tip like a human being, she said, through tears, for the rest of your life. For the rest of my life, he swore. The copper kettle did not close. Thursday came, and Julian Vance walked into the glass boardroom where his father's name was carved into the wall, and Grant Kessler had his slideshow and his votes and his very good chart about the red cell and the bad neighborhood, and Julian let him finish. Then he stood, and he told the room the truth, that the numbers were right and the numbers were not the whole ledger, that a company which only ever closed the places that grew people like Cora Bishop would be profitable and dead inside, the way his father had been profitable and dead inside, the way Julian himself had nearly become. He said it plainly, the way a rough gray-bearded man in an alley had once told a waitress the honest thing. And then he called the vote, and he won it by 2, and Grant Kessler cleaned out his booth for good. Bishop Kitchen opened in the spring. It kept the vinyl booths, because Cora would not hear of losing them, and it kept the humming pie case, and it kept the neon sign that promised open. But now the counter ran along an open kitchen, and behind it worked 6 cooks who could never in their lives have paid for culinary school, learning knife cuts and mother sauces and the one thing no school teaches, which Rosa taught on the first day and every day after, wooden spoon in hand. You feed people. That is how you tell them they matter. Cora ran it. Not as anyone's girlfriend, not as anyone's rescue, but as the chef whose name was over the door, earned in front of every skeptic in the company, most of whom came around the first time they tasted the braised chicken. One of her first cooks was a man who had slept in the same alley where Julian tested her, and by summer he was running the brunch line with a steadiness that made regulars ask for him by name. Cora had learned that her mother's arithmetic was right all along. You feed people, and in time they become people who feed people, and that was a kind of wealth no one could ever repossess. She still worked doubles. She still fell asleep reading cookbooks. But the envelopes had stopped coming, not because a billionaire wrote a check, but because a chef built a business, and the difference between those two things was the difference between Cora Bishop and the headline, and she had spent everything she had to keep it. Julian came in every day he was in the city. He sat in the corner booth, her section, and ordered the coffee Rosa still brewed strong enough to strip paint, and he drank it like it was the finest thing in the world. He left cash under the saucer, generous but never insane, and he learned the name of every cook and every dishwasher and the man who mopped the floor at midnight, and Cora watched the loneliest rich man in Boston slowly become a man who had more than 3 houses, who had people, at last, who would sit in any snow for him. They married in the fall, a year to the week from the first snow, in the diner, because where else? Eleanor Vance sat in the front booth and cried without any dignity at all and did not care. Rosa gave the toast and threatened the groom with a spoon. And when it came time for the vows, Cora did not talk about fortunes or fairy tales. She talked about a cold night and a milk crate and a man who had nothing to give, and how the whole shape of her life had turned on a plate of food handed across the dark to someone she thought the world had forgotten. I gave you my dinner because you had not asked for anything, she told him, in front of everyone, and it turned out you were the richest man in the city. But here is the thing I know now that I did not know then. You were the poorest person in that alley, and I was the richest, and neither one of us had a dime to do with it. You just needed somebody to sit down in the cold and stay. She smiled at him, this impossible, careful, no longer lonely man. So I am going to keep sitting down in the cold with you, Julian Vance. For the rest of my life. And you are going to keep spending the only thing that was ever worth anything. He kissed her in the diner that his money had almost closed and her kindness had saved, under the neon sign that had never once managed to say anything but the truth. Some people go looking for the soul of a place from the top of a glass tower, and they never find it, because it was never up there. Sometimes it is down on the ground, in the cold, on a milk crate, in the hands of a tired woman with $4 to her name who gives away her only meal to a stranger, and calls it company, and changes a life she did not know was watching. That is the end of the story. But maybe it is really the beginning, the way the best endings always are. So now it is your turn. Tell me down in the comments, honestly, would you have done what Cora did? Would you have given away your last meal, on the coldest night of the year, to a stranger who could not give you a single thing back? And do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10, and if it moved you even a little, leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell, so the next story finds its way to you too. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.